On this week's Newsbreak, we are talking with environmental specialist Aaron Zimmermann about urban wildlife management. So welcome, Aaron.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. So as I mentioned in our last one, we're doing a little bit of a series about different natural resources topics, and you're the lucky winner to come talk with me next about this important topic about urban wildlife management. So what methods do you use here to measure the success of your urban wildlife management projects?
So one of the methods we use is we look at the urban canopy and vegetated coverage. So that gives us a screenshot, kind of a moment in time of what our city's canopy coverage looks like. If we can identify trends, evaluating data going into the future, we could see where our canopy coverage is gaining or maybe declining in certain areas, and we can go in and target areas that might need some urban wildlife management. Other things we can look at are impervious areas versus pervious areas. So your impervious areas are your houses, sidewalks, driveways, anywhere where water can't absorb into the ground and it runs off, and that could carry pollutants and things from our lawns, whether that's fertilizers, pesticides, and that ultimately has an effect on our water bodies, and that can result in things like algae blooms or fish kills. So we can look at maybe where we have higher levels of impervious areas, think about some of the ways that we can maybe reduce our impervious areas and put in more pervious areas, such as replacing parking lots with like your traditional asphalt parking lots with a grass parking lot, right, or removing a sidewalk that's concrete and replacing it with some pervious pavement or some other alternative. So we can look at some of our impervious features. And one of my other favorite ones is our wildlife reporting app, and just general phone calls from the public, and they can tell us what they see wildlife-wise, where it is, what it is, and that might lead to us taking some action. Perhaps it's a gopher tortoise that lives right along the road, and maybe we want to put out a sign, give it some more visibility. That way, drivers in the area can know maybe they see a sign, they slow down, they look around a little bit more, and look out for our urban wildlife.
Right, I know we've been seeing the signs out there. That just kicked off, but that's another topic for another day. But it sounds like my next question, we may have hit on most of them, but just to check if there's any that I missed, what are some of the other key strategies that you employ to manage wildlife, especially in Northport, growing so rapidly?
Yeah, and I think that's baked into our Unified Land Development Code, which really incentivizes builders and homeowners to maintain as much natural landscape as possible. And where that landscape might get removed, we can try to put back or create new wildlife areas or habitat on our own properties. I think there's something that everybody in the city can do on their properties. Sure. Whether it's as simple as installing a bird feeder, that helps our wildlife, planting a butterfly garden for our pollinators. It could be just planting trees, which can, obviously trees provide habitat for a variety of species, but also it cools down your yard, might cast shade on your house, influences your energy bills. So I think there's something that every homeowner can do. And along with the Unified Land Development Code, with the way it's incentivized also is when that vegetation is lost, we might impose mitigation fees. And what mitigation fees are is for vegetation that is lost, we would collect fees that go directly into the tree fund. And the benefit of the tree fund is we use that fund to plant trees around the city and other vegetation around the city to replace lost vegetation. So when vegetation comes out, we have an opportunity to put vegetation back in somewhere else.
Yeah, and that's super important around here. I know green space is important to a lot, probably the majority, most of the residents, and especially you guys in the Natural Resources Division. So I have a bird house thing that I have stuck to my window, but I hadn't filled it for a while, and now a mourning dove made a nest in it. So it still is serving some kind of purpose, right?
Sure.
It's kind of helping, maybe. So speaking of that, mourning doves are everywhere, but what are some of the most common wildlife species you manage here in Northport? And I know we talked about a little bit, but some of the unique challenges with gopher tortoises and some of the other endangered species.
Yeah, I'd say the most common are gopher tortoises that people might see on their day-to-day that we specifically look at for managing. And so gopher tortoises, they are protected in the state of Florida, and they're protected just through, so they're not endangered.
Okay.
But
Sorry.
Well, I'll talk about the scrub jays, which are endangered.
Okay.
But our gopher tortoises, they are protected, and that's because through the nature of development, it puts them in greater harm or risk of harm, just because they naturally live in higher and drier places, and that is where we tend to build our houses and our businesses and our roads. We build on those high and dry places. So we are looking to, when we develop and look for places that are able to have development, it tends to be in the same places where gopher tortoises exist. So there's a very thorough process through the state of Florida, which manages the relocation, manages the plans to move them either on-site, off-site. If we can avoid them altogether, that's best case scenario. They can stay right where they are on the property. But so that's one that we actively manage year-round. The scrub jays are an endangered species. They're only found here in the state of Florida, so it's a very special species, and we have identified areas throughout Northport where family groups and their habitat exist. So that is a process that is overseen by the federal level, so the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And much like the gopher tortoises, they are very heavily regulated, and there's a whole federal process. If there's a property that is aimed to be developed in one of these known locations, there's extensive surveys that have to happen. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife has to provide a release of the lands, and often they also have a responsibility if that's a builder or a home going in, they have to put in a certain amount of specific vegetation that the scrub jays like and they utilize. So there's a bit of a habitat element to that. Even though you may be building your house, you might still be required to put some vegetation back that will benefit the scrub jays.
Right. Well, that sounds like, I mean, to me, all great things to have in place. I know that for others it might be a pain or whatever, but I think it's definitely worth it. So in your corner, are there any kind of like technological tools or software that you use in these management practices? Because I know like we are big into GIS, like geographical information systems.
Yep, you got it.
Or other things like that. So how do you utilize that in your corner?
Yeah, so GIS is a big tool, Geographic Information Systems, and the best way I like to describe what GIS even is, I think of it as a combination of Google Earth and Excel, which has pretty much maps and the ability to add and manipulate data, visualize it. So this is a great tool that we use to identify trends, look at things spatially. So for example, I think I mentioned earlier our tree canopy. We can use GIS to look at hot spots where we might have less tree canopy and we might want to initiate an effort to do a planting plan, whether maybe that's some street trees, or start a program to have individual homeowners plant trees, or we'll find areas that need the resources the most and have focus areas depending on what we can see with our data spatially and things of, So
well, and is that also, as you mentioned this as well, the wildlife sighting thing, is that based in GIS as well in some capacity?
Yeah, in some capacity it is.
Yeah.
It's much more simplistic on the user side because we want to make that app as user-friendly as possible. So usually it just comes down to, having your location on your device you're reporting on, or putting in a location manually. And we just want to know what you saw, when you saw it, and where you saw it, and we can then take action if necessary, and otherwise it provides data, which is always helpful. Another thing we use is softwares, such as our tree canopy software, which does a lot of that interpretation for us, so that we can have a more precise eye on our trends in tree canopy. And we also have databases. Our databases hold information about our scrub jay population, so we know where they are and where their habitat exists, so that we know when a lot might potentially want to be developed. We have it flagged in our systems, and we know that there's some additional things that need to happen before anyone comes in and tries to build on any of these properties.
Yeah, that's great to have all that stuff in place prior to, instead of scrambling, trying to figure it out, like as they're starting to do it and freaking out. So that's great that all that stuff is ready to go. So for my final question for you, you know, as I mentioned, Northport's growing real fast. So we're going to have to definitely be focusing on the urban wildlife management portion of it. So where do you see the future of it heading, and how is Natural Resources preparing for it?
So I see Florida, and even more specifically Northport, continuing to grow, continuing to be a popular place where people want to live, work, and play. So as we grow, I want to make sure we don't lose sight of the long-term goals of wildlife conservation, even in our urban environments, whether that's something that we can identify through good candidates for land acquisition, properties that might have good habitat for threatened and endangered species. There could be a heritage tree on that lot. There could be lots along a creek or a canal, and we can look at lots for acquisitions so that we can increase our buffers along our water courses, which can help improve our water quality in our city. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for us to look at land acquisition, and it can help everything from our endangered species, threatened species, to our water quality, and also just having more vegetation. There's lots of evidence to suggest that it helps people mentally when they see vegetation, and they're going through communities and they see the trees and they see the wildlife. So it's also, you know, there's the physical benefits that reduce our urban heat island effect, but there's emotional benefits and things that just make us feel better in our day-to-day.
Absolutely.
So I think there's lots of opportunities also to take advantage of grants. There's so many things I think that we want to do as a city and as a division, but there's always opportunities where even local, state, or federal funding's available for many different projects, land acquisition, habitat restoration. So we want to make sure we keep those things in sight as well. And I think those are some of the best ways we can make sure that, you know, we can do things in the short term and keep our eye on the prize in the long term. And I think with the city's founding of this new division, it just reaffirms that commitment to that's the direction the city wants to go. And, you know, we're a great team, and we're new, and we're we're new, but we have a lot that we want to do now, and there's a lot we want to do later. And I think as we establish ourselves, we're going to be in a good position to do some great things with the city. Yeah,
you guys have only just begun. And like while you were talking, I was hearing so many, like, I don't know if buzzwords is the right word, but so many things residents talk about, you know, often, like the endangered species and the tree canopy, all that stuff. So we're just so thrilled that the Natural Resources Division is here to really make huge strides in those sectors. That's going to make a lot of residents very happy, and I think they already are. So is there anything else you wanted to add that I didn't ask you?
No, I think we were pretty comprehensive, and
I think so too.
And I'd be happy to answer any more questions you might have for me.
Well, what if people have questions? Other people. I've asked you a bunch of questions. What if residents have questions?
You could always reach us at naturalresources@northportfl.gov, or you can call the city and ask for the Natural Resources Division, and we love to engage with all our residents, and we're happy to answer any questions.
That's great. All right. Well, I think that about does it. I appreciate you joining us here today, Aaron. It was really fun talking with you.
Yeah.
And for everybody else listening, I will see you on the next one.